Have you ever tried making a large-scale change to a code base? Maybe introducing a new pattern, maybe shifting to a new technology? When doing so, you likely encountered employees who felt blindsided, right? This might be the first time they've heard of those changes. They might say, I didn't realize we were doing that. It might feel unclear to them. They may not know what the change means for them personally, for their team, or for the company as a whole. They might feel unskilled. They may not feel like they have the information and the skills to do what you're asking them to do. They may feel resource constrained. They have a set of responsibilities that they're responsible for. They're likely building new features or things for customers, and now you're asking them to do something else. And ultimately, this can lead to them feeling unmotivated. This can lead to them not being bought in on your change. That's why, for one of the reasons that changes are so hard. And so ultimately, 50% of change initiatives lead to failure. That's a lot. So my objective this afternoon is to describe and demonstrate a change management process that you can replicate in your own organization with code. The benefits of using a change management process are communication. Employees are not surprised by the change. Understanding. Individuals understand what the change looks like for them, their team, and the company as a whole. Skill development. Proper plans can be made to train employees. Awareness. You can have correct understanding of the other demands employees have on their time. And ultimately, with incentives, understanding of the change, skills, and resources, there can be buy-in. So, the key point I want you guys to remember today is changing code is about changing people. There are some technical things I'm going to show today. We'll talk about some ESLint rules. I have a script that generates a report. Those are cool things, but those are just tools. This is a human-centric process, and the code base in your organization is largely derivative of the thoughts that developers in your organization have. So, going forward, I want you guys to take this question with you. Think about what code changes can you make to your code bases that positively impact business metrics. So, what is change management? Change management is the language that we use to describe and implement change. I have a simple scenario. Sorry, I know this image is blurry. It looks way better on my computer. But I have this simple project. Here, we'll pull up the project. Oh man, this is hard. Okay, so it's a really basic to-do app. UtahJS says don't use to-do apps. Sorry, UtahJS. But the app is not what's important. We're not going to run any of this code. It's just a thought experiment. So we have a really basic to-do app. It just goes through a list of to-dos and renders them and gives you the options to edit and update and delete them. And then we have a second component here, and it is just a confirmation modal, a button that triggers a confirmation modal that says, are you sure? And then it lets you delete the to-do apps, right? And so we have this fake imaginary company that makes this simple to-do app, and we have a leader in our organization who's like, hey, we don't have consistent styling through our application. This is a really big problem. And so we have to make a change, right? We have to understand what the issue is. Here we've determined we're using some styled components, and we have this issue here. Here, we have this issue, right? I have a cancel button, and this is not a styled component. And so no styles are being applied to this. If you aren't familiar with styled components are, you could correctly do this in this commented out code here. This gives this a class name prop that comes from this styled function, and we're attaching it to this button here. And so styled components hashes these styles and dynamically creates a class name, which it attaches to this element here. And then when we're styling this element down here, it correctly attaches the right class name, and then we get this beautiful 5-pixel solid red border that we want for some reason. And so in our fake organization, we've decided this is the problem. We have a lot of occurrences where we're styling things that aren't styled components, and that means these styles don't apply. So we're going to walk through the steps of change management with this example. And so these are kind of the high-level steps of change management. JUPEAT, this is an acronym that means nothing, but hopefully it's weird enough that you remember it. It stands for justify, understand, plan, execute, and then analyze and track. And so we're going to talk about these. The first 3 steps are really like, I don't want to say private communication, but these are more of the planning steps, more of the communication to decision makers in your organization. It's not that anything you're talking about here is secret. It's just we're trying to get our ducks in a row and make sure this is something we're doing before we roll this thing out to everyone in our organization. And we have people, we want people to feel like we're putting together a united front. We thought through some things and we're cohesive in our plan. So step 1 is justify the change. We want to think about what business metrics it impacts. In this case, it might be brand loyalty. It might be the churn rate of our customers. It's usually easier to justify the change if it's a top-down change, right? Somebody from above, upper level leader is proposing this change, than if it's a developer or someone kind of in the code is saying, hey, this would help us, right? Not that it's impossible, just usually harder that way. We need to answer the question, why change? In this case, it might be an improved look and feel of our app in brand loyalty, like we talked about. We need to answer the question, why change now, right? We have lots of things that we're doing. Organizations are all about efficiency. And so we need to decide, is this a good thing that we should do now, or is this a good thing that we could do later? In this case, right, we might have projections. We might say, hey, we have this customer renewal coming up. We have a demo with this customer who really is, they're really into styling or how things look or whatever. And then we need to answer the question, what happens if we don't change? So we may have a business intelligence unit that says, hey, we're going to lose a projected X number of dollars if we don't make this change. So next step is understand. We have to understand the change. What is the change? In this case, it is identifying where we're using styled components inside tag template literals, where we're styling things that are non-styled components. We need to give some thought to what else is happening in the organization. So there are product teams that are launching features. Maybe there are, adoptions of new technologies. Maybe we're redesigning a data model. These are all things that we need to weigh when we decide when we want to implement this and what our timeline looks like. And then lastly, we need to implement, or we need to think about what the lift is. In this case, this is not a huge lift, right? Pretty small project. And the way that I would go about this, the way that I have gone about this is I wrote an ESLint rule to describe or to identify cases where this is happening. And then we're going to manually fix it, but you don't have to. ESLint also has a automated fix that you can use if it's a simple enough change. So if you're not familiar with ESLint, ESLint is a static analysis tool for linting JavaScript code. It takes things and transforms them into ASTs, which are abstract syntax trees, which is just kind of like a generalized way of thinking about your code. This is an example of a custom ESLint rule. What this does is it goes through tag template literals and builds up a list of identifiers that are in those tag template literals. And then as it finishes linting the file for tag template literals and identifiers, it goes through and checks each identifier and says, okay, is this a variable declaration and is it a styled component? And if not, it throws an error. So doing that helps us realize how many occurrences of this violation we have in our application. And that helps us understand what the lift is when we're fixing it. Next slide. Next, we want to plan the change. This is when we talk about metrics, right? We've talked about, churn rate is hopefully something the business is tracking. That would apply to this scenario. We also want to talk about milestones, right? Maybe we set a 2-month timeline in this case, and we want to find and clear up all these things. We want half done by month 1 and all of them done by the end of month 2. It's also important that we plan a rollout plan. So this is actual communication to employees, right? In our organization, this would look like a front-end guild presentation where we explain what are styled components, maybe a deep dive on how they work, and then we would show how we're misusing them. We also may need to provide more tools, more information, more processes, more time. And so the ESLint rule is a great example of a tool that we can use to further this. And then another thing that I have built here is a script that lints things, not lints things, but a script that builds up a list of these errors, goes through code owners, and then shows who owns what file and how many errors they have. I'll run ESLint and then this at the end so you can get an example at the end of this demo so you can get an example of what they do. And so we've built some tools. We've come up with some metrics on how we're going to measure, are we having success? We're going to compare that to some business metrics and say, is this having the effect we thought it would have? We have a rollout plan. We want to designate some change leaders in our organization. Maybe these are early adopters. Maybe these are people that were just really excited about this change and help them to kind of push things through, get their teams excited about things. And then we also want to budget time, right? So that involves meeting with project managers, making sure that they're on board with this, that they realize, hey, some of your team's time is going to be spent making this change. And then we want to come up with our date. When are we going to implement? What's going to be the start of our timeline so we can go live with these changes, right? That kind of flows right in this next one. We go live with our changes, and then we need to support the change, and we need to celebrate the change. So in our organization, this looks like office hours. We're available for several hours a week where we're just there to answer questions, help people make changes, answer questions they have about other things that are related to the front end. And then we want to celebrate. I love celebration. It's a really great way to remind people of things without being pushy and without being like, hey, you're not doing this, so can you do this? And it does so in a positive way. Next, we want to analyze and track, right? So we're going to go into our project, right? Maybe initially we need to, oh man, you can't see the bottom of this, but yeah, kind of. We're going to run npm run lint. This is not a big project, so there's not a bunch of these violations. I don't know if we can see the bottom of this. Oh, no, there's a problem running it.
Just drag up the terminal panel, be taller.
Well, I think it will just stay at the bottom. Yeah. Our React version is not specified. Okay, anyways. So that's not going to demo, but that's fine. It would show you, ESLint output about some errors. And then, so that's kind of an example of the JUPEAT, right? Justify, understand, analyze, execute, and track. And so now we're going to talk about a real life example of this where I work. Corey Brown spoke earlier today. He's in here somewhere. Hey, Corey. And he gave a talk earlier, like a long time ago, called The Miseducation of CSS. It's a great talk. It's 40 minutes. I recommend giving that a listen. But this is a change initiative that we went through at our company recently. And so ADRs are kind of the way that we plan in our organization. This is kind of justification, understanding, and plan all wrapped into one. You go through the change, you talk about the problem it solves, you give examples, you go through risks and trade-offs, you have a hypothesis on how this will help the organization, and then an implementation plan. Next, we wrote the rule. We used StyleLint instead of ESLint because it was more geared towards styling, and so that made some things simpler. And we had a small presentation on contextualized positioning. We answered the questions, what is it? How do we refactor our code so that it uses contextualized positioning? And what benefits do we get from it? I guess I should explain, just for context, contextualized positioning is this concept that code should style itself and position its immediate children. So anything from the border of an element and inside should be styled by itself, but the position of the element, maybe it's in a grid layout and you specify the column in the row, that would happen in the parent. So we also have an awesome culture. I think this is important to call out. Culture can be one of the hardest things that stops change initiatives. And really kind of the boiling point in my mind is we had a respected staff engineer who was like, I'm not sold on this, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And that kind of took a lot of the resistance to this, and people were like, okay, yeah, let's just try it and we'll see if we like it. It's not a done thing. And overall, I think the feedback was positive. People generally liked it. They felt like it did make CSS simpler. It broke things into different concerns, layout and styling. And then we enforced this rule in CI. And you'll see the ultimate indicator is Slack emojis here. People were not super excited about this, right? You'll realize this is a very abbreviated process compared to the one that I explained earlier, right? So ultimately, we said, hey, we're going to enforce this. We enforced it, and people were like, oh, no. There was a team that had like a big feature that they were trying to push over the line. I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and we had to revert it. So at this point, we kind of had to backtrack, and we had to think, why didn't this work? What happened? What went wrong? And we realized, hey, like people were probably unaware of this change, right? This was something that we felt like that we said, hey, this is going to happen. And then there was a space of time where there was kind of dead noise. And then we were like, okay, now it's in CI, like good luck. And that, is hard for people to deal with. So we said, let's give this a second shot. We're going to do this the right way. We started training immediately, even through Slack messages. We were like, hey, here's how you get feedback in your editor if you use VS Code. Here's some of the promised benefits we think this will have. We asked that people, start to make some time in their sprint planning. And then for people who didn't use VS Code and didn't have the extension, we were like, hey, here's the script that you can run to get that feedback in your terminal. We created tools for reporting. This is what the tool that I made that didn't run looked like. It will give you a table that shows aggregates by team, and then it will give you some terminal output that gives you like, hey, this file had this many errors and it's owned by this team. So it's very clear for teams who owns what, and then it's also really cool. People can see things decrease over time, right? Their own team metrics and then other team metrics. So we made this rule or this script. We showed people how to use it. We recognized and continue to train people. So we shouted out some people. Like I said, shout outs are a great way to say like, hey, this is still going on. This is important. We're still doing this without being like, you're not doing this. And so we gave continuous updates on progress, the enforcement of the timeline, and we responded to some feedback. There were some issues in the report that we made, and someone fixed those or recommended we fix those, and that was awesome. And then we answered a bunch of questions. I don't expect you to read all of these, but these were just a bunch of like, in this situation, how do I do this? Or this seems like it's an exception to the rule. And so we made sure those were documented, those got answered in Slack, and that people could find those. And then we asked teams for feedback. Overall, people were pretty positive, I think, about this. If not, come tell me afterward, I guess. A bunch of my teammates are here. And then we enforced the rule on the planned date, and we had about 40 violations left when we enforced it. So we enforced it on changed files. That meant it wasn't blocking for most people, just if you made a change to a file. And eventually we got to 0 violations. So honestly, I had some wishes. I wish we had a data visualization instead of just a table. I think that would have been cooler to highlight the decrease in violations over time. I wish we would have started with a test group. It's hard to anticipate all the different things that are going to happen, and so it's better if you can start with a small group, kind of get an idea of those, and then roll those out. And then, honestly, more pushback would have made for a better presentation. We didn't really have a lot of like people that were like, no, I will not, absolutely will not do this, and so that made things easier. So, in recap, right? Justify, understand, plan, execute, analyze, track, and these are tools, right? Changing code is about changing people. This is a human-centric process, and code is an output of the people that you work with. Thank you.